Hello, everyone. This is Professor Hamamoto. It is December 8, year 2022, 3 p.m. Pacific Daylight Time, 6 p.m. Eastern Time. And I say Eastern and specific because we have as a very special guest today. He's a return guest. His name is Mr. Manny Grossman. He is a professional horticulturalist, and he was formerly, as many of you know, with the New York Botanical Garden in the Bronx. And we just talked a few minutes just before going live here. He's a musician, I'm a musician, and I just said, hey, why don't we just, I'll bounce off a couple of riffs to you, and then you can just, bounce them back to me. We'll just go around. So we're going to leave about 15 minutes toward the end to talk about some of my ongoing investigation into the occult nature of gardening, of mazes, of flowers, of plant life. And I think Mr. Grossman is the perfect person to comment on it. And this is in preparation for my talk that I'm going to be giving before New Year's on the tournament of Rosicrucians in beautiful Pasadena, California. So, with no further ado, I'm going to bring him on screen. And Mr. Grossman, we're going to have you um, announce your sites. Here you go. I'd like to, first of all, here's Mr. Grossman here. But before I forget, I want you to give to the public your sites where they can start looking at your new gardening show, as well as the revamped true crime site.
Well, thank you very much, Professor Hamamoto. And I have to say, my friend, it has been too long. It's been several months since we last were together, and I've been looking forward to this one. Of course, we floated this idea a couple months ago, and I'm glad that we finally made it to the airwaves on it. And thank you very much for allowing me to plug my channels. Well, as the good professor just mentioned, I do have a new gardening channel, which is entitled Gardening Uncensored with Manny Grossman. And the reason I named it that was because, as the professor knows, and some of you out there know, I used to be a long-term teacher at the famed New York Botanical Garden School of Adult Education, where I taught many, many classes for many, many years. And of course, at the beginning of this thing that happened 2 years ago, well, we all know how, well, society became filled with good Germans, right? So I was taken out by cancel culture, and I think the professor has experience with that as well in his professional career. And so I decided to start a gardening channel of my own, not only to, well, starve the beast, hopefully, and have people take classes for free, the same classes that I would teach at the famed New York Botanical Gardens. There's really no difference between the ones I did online there and the ones I do online now, but also to be able to speak my mind, to be able to fully be who I am. And so in my gardening channels, I go on flights of fancy, and I'm always talking about the things that interest me in addition to horticulture and gardening. And so people have a great time with that. I don't know what happened to the professor. There he is.
Yeah. And as I mentioned before, we're going to be dipping in towards the end on this particular Rosicrucian swamp creature. I think you'll probably recognize her.
Oh, you should have given me a trigger warning on that one.
Okay, so
Actually, I just,
people who are watching, hang on to the end. This is going to be a real wild and woolly presentation, and Mr. Grossman has a PowerPoint presentation. Mr. Grossman, did you want me to start with the Bill Wilson, a couple of like 30 seconds worth, because he's been inspirational in your career? Is that right?
absolutely. Bill Mollison
Or
is
Mollison?
he's the inventor of a design science and a way of life in agriculture called permaculture, which is part of our discussion today. And it was actually just a short 2-minute video that I watched in 2007. I was a musician in those years. I was running a percussion instrument rental business in those years, and I needed a change in my life. And I've always been a revolutionary in the sense that I do not want to be part of the system. I don't want to work for the system. I don't want to enrich the system as little as I possibly can. So I was looking at, for things that would make me happy personally to do in the next phase of my life. And I came across permaculture. I don't know how it happened or what caused me to look up agriculture and gardening. And I came across a series of videos called The Global Gardener by Bill Mollison. And just a short 2-minute video literally changed my life. At that moment, I said, this is what I want to do. I want to create revolution by gardening, by getting back to the land. And of course, Bill Mollison and permaculture, which we'll get into in a little bit more detail a little later, was my foray and my entryway into this. And I think the professor has some video.
Yeah. Let's take like 20 seconds of it, and you get a really good idea of
Take as long as you want. Yeah.
Yeah, Mr. Mollison's attitude towards life. And I think we need to share his sense of anger and aggression if we're going to make it through these crises here.
Absolutely.
What was or is your motivation for practicing permaculture?
Well, it's very simple. It's anger and actually fury.
Fury
I have
about
no
what?
other motivation.
Fury about?
The senseless destruction that we're visiting on the earth, and the way people in poverty and hunger are treated, the global monetary system and its ignorance, and just generally the fact that we could do so much better and we don't. We just ignore what's happening, and so I'm very angry.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, Mr. Grossman, he's a man after your own heart. I mean, I didn't expect his motivation is anger, right?
Well, yeah, I mean, that's why.
Frustration.
Yeah, that's exactly why I was attracted to this gentleman. And it's not anger where he just lashes out blindly like so many of us do, myself included, where we just have to throw our comments on Twitter and put our Instagram posts up. But no, he chose to do something actually very proactive, which was withdraw from the system and start gardens, and not only just gardens that are ornamental, but also functional as well, which we'll get into when we talk a little bit deeper about permaculture. But yes, I suggest Bill Mollison as is such an amazing inspiration to me and to millions of people all over the earth, and his anger and his fury, and in honor of that, I have my PV Fury bass behind me. He really has did, because he's now deceased, a major service to humanity going forward.
Wonderful. And another person that you were influenced by, as were many other people around the world, is Fukuoka Masanobu of Japan. And I have one of his seminal texts right here. It's out of print, by the way. And you were going to speak to the One Straw Revolution. I thought we would just see a few seconds of Fukuoka Sensei in his native land of Japan, Ehime, just very briefly to get a flavor for his presence. There's something that these two gentlemen share. They're really intense human beings. They're gentle in their own way, but they are as serious as a heart attack.
雑草を抜かない、農薬も化学肥料も与えない。福岡正信さんは自然農法を実践し、世界中の農業者に大きな影響を与えました。
いかにしたら昼寝ができる時間が多いかと、それがもう最大のモットーでしたね。ああするこうするじゃなくて、何もしないようにするのには、昼寝するのにはどうしたらいいかと。
Okay. Yeah, you get a kind of a flavor. He was 95 years old when that was filmed, and that was done by Japanese national television. And it talked about him living in his rural province, his home province of Ehime, which is in one of the smaller islands. But he was an insider. He was a researcher, a medical researcher. He had gone to university and became disenchanted on it. One day, this is what the documentary goes into. One day he went home on the yearly annual It's called Furusato during the holidays, New Year's, and then he gotten back in touch with his upbringing, and thereafter re-revolutionized agriculture, not just in Japan but in the U.S. So with that, let me know when you want to start with your presentation. I'll bring myself off this, and I'll open the screen up so people can read some of the graphics.
Well, real quick before we get into that on Fukuoka. Now, I'm not sure how it works in Japan. Now, I've always thought his name was Masanobu Fukuoka, but it's actually the other way around.
Yeah, the family name is given first. So
Okay.
since he's Japanese, I'm giving him his Japanese name. It's
Right.
Fukuoka. It's a Milji is a family name, and his personal name is Masanobu. So I
Right,
just
and
call him Fukuoka. Oh, by
right,
the way,
okay.
that means translates into happy hill.
Interesting. And well, his father was a farmer and had orchards on hills, so maybe
Yes.
there's some connection there. But he was a
Well,
very
Oka means hill.
Oka.
Fuku means happy or joy. So and there's a strain of rice named Happy Hill after him, Fukuoka,
No
that the
kidding,
government
really.
assigned him. Yeah, I just reading it in this. I thought,
That it's a
yeah.
great. I got to get that book. I got to find it. You're a lucky guy. You found it. But yeah, he was quite an interesting character in the sense that listen, I don't know much about Japanese culture. I'm just going to be honest with you. But the Japanese, from what I know, are not known to be nonconformists. Would I be correct in that statement?
I think that's true in general, but the ones who are nonconformists are way out there.
Right, and
That's the trade-off.
right, he was way out there. All of a sudden, he's a researcher, as you said. He was doing actually research in for plants. He was part of a whole research team that was the first to synthesize, I believe, gibberellin, a plant hormone that I'm actually going to be teaching about in my next plant science class. And one day he just decides, hey, man, nothing means anything. There is no meaning in the world. Nothing has any meaning. We know nothing. Humans are crap. Like, we just are these, wild creatures that are just running around blind. And he resigned from his position and he decided to go back to the land. And of course, everybody thought he was nuts, and everybody thought he was mentally ill and wanted to put him into a hospital. And he stuck with it, and he started a revolution in agriculture, which continues to this day, and actually did influence Bill Mollison later in life. He was older than Bill Mollison, and he was a huge influence on the early back to land movement and the permaculture movement, which we'll get into. So yeah, I think now's a good time we can start our little slide presentation, because we are all about revolutionary agriculture. Agriculture is thought of as a way to make a living, and farmers here in America, we are all about industrial agriculture and what's called huge monocultures, meaning growing just soybeans, growing just rice, growing just potatoes or just corn, and so on and so forth. And these practices have proven to be so destructive to planet Earth that it really beggars belief. And we continue to do it because, well, we have set up a system around us, which is, of course, killing us all, but which we can't seem to find a way out of. And so, the last couple of years, humanity has been tested, and quite honestly, we failed. I'm not blaming humanity. I'm not saying that we're bad people. In fact, I love humanity and I love my fellow man. But quite frankly, we failed. And because we failed the test that these evil demons in power put forth to us these last 2 years, and we're on YouTube, so of course you have to read between the lines as to what I'm saying. We now are in a position as humans where we can either go one or two ways. We can be fed into the evil demon New World Order system of constant biosurveillance, tracking, digital credit scores, cashless society, and so on and so forth. All things that I was reading about in the 1990s, which they said were coming, and I actually took very seriously. Or we can go another way, and that is disengage from it all. My moment, I was always disengaged from about 1995 to 2016, and I was sucked back into the system in 2016 by a certain charlatan who came about and fooled all of us on the libertarian, conservative, right movement. Of course, I consider myself a classic liberal of the 90s. And I just say that those people left me, right? Like they went off the deep end. But we can go another way. I decided after this last election, Professor, that I've had enough. I'm through trying to convince anybody of anything. I've realized again that my initial stance was correct, that they're all out to get us, both the left and the right of the mainstream, and that humanity has to go another way. And that way is total disengagement as much as possible from the system. Now, how do we do this? Well, we could become hermits on an island somewhere and pick food out of the garbage, and that's not really a way of life that I want. Or we can look to these pioneers of regenerative agriculture, such as Bill Mollison and Masanobu-san, and we could be influenced by them, we could learn from them, and we can get back to the land. Now, there have always been back to the land movements. One of the first and most influential books was called The Good Life by I forget their names actually. I forget a couple. They were from Vermont. And they wrote a book called The Good Life, which was highly influential to then the later beatnik and hippie movements, because that book came out in the early 50s. But life was still good for all of us back then, quite frankly. We were all living fat. We were all living pretty well up until about 2001, when the evil demon system really took root and started in with their really never-ending attack on humanity since then, of constant terror against the people of the earth. So I have decided, and I'm hoping that if I can just influence one of you out there, that my job is really done here. I have decided personally that in my life, I am now striving to get the hell out, get to a farm, grow food, and sell it on the side of the road or at farmers markets, and barter as much as possible, and create my own little world. And I know that, of course, that takes some money. Luckily, I do have land in my family that's been in the family since the 60s. I have about 10 acres in Puerto Rico that I have that I've been planting since 2008. But it's not that hard to get an acre of land somewhere in the countryside. And it's really not that hard to become a gardener. In fact, I say we were born gardeners. Plants and humans evolved with each other. We pissed all over them and then they fed us. That's kind of the way it goes. So Bill Mollison is a great place to start and also end, in a sense, but also all of the streams in which he began all of these other forays. And of course, the 1-2 punch of Mollison and Masanobu should be enough to get anybody who truly is interested in this heavily inspired. So just take a look at this quote by Bill Mollison. The greatest change we need to make is from consumption to production. Okay, and what he means by that is production of food, production of fuel, of fiber, of all the needs of man, even on a small scale in our own gardens. If only 10% of us do this, there is enough for everyone. Hence the futility, here we go. Hence the futility of revolutionaries who have no gardens, who depend on the very system they attack, and who produce words and bullets, not food and shelter. So highly revolutionary statement here. And of course, this ties in with what I'm talking about today. The revolutionary act of bioregenerative agriculture. People don't think that it's very revolutionary, but it's revolutionary on two scales, two ways. The first, of course, is that you're disengaging from the system. This system is evil. It wants to kill you. Okay? It wants you dead. And while it's killing you, it wants to extract all your money. There's a reason why people make all this money and then it ends up back into the biopharma medical system at the people's ends of life. okay? Because they've spent their entire life accumulating this money and creating so much internal stress and eating so much processed and junk chemical foods, alien molecules, as I call them, that then they end up sick, and then they end up giving all their money back to this evil system that created the problems in the first place. But of course, the second revolutionary act of bioregenerative agriculture is repairing the damage done to our earth by these systems created, of course, by families such as the Rockefellers of the Green Revolution, okay, the so-called Green Revolution, which in essence was just harboring artificial nitrogen, packaging it as plant fertilizer, and then spreading it all over the earth to abnormally grow all of these plants. And why did they want to do that? Well, my opinion is they needed a whole mess of human beings to run their factories. Well, guess what, guys? Now they have a system where we're superfluous. The system does not need us anymore. We are actually a hindrance to them. And that's why I think they've gone on this culture of death and spiritual destruction. America right now is spiritually sick, and we need healing. And because I have no power over everybody, I have no power over the rest of the world. The only thing that I have power over is myself, right? That's why I have decided to go the route of farming. Now I know what you're saying, Manny. You're sitting in an apartment in New York City with a base behind you produced by the system, with all the creature comforts. Yes, you'd be right. But remember, guys, it takes planning and it takes work. The first thing to do, of course, is to get educated and then go out and put it into practice. My hope is that today will start you on the process of educating yourself, inspiring you, and then heading out to the fields and putting your hands in the dirt. So Bill Mollison, amazing guy. Now he invented this system called permaculture. Permaculture, before we get into the teachings of Fukuoka, permaculture is a human-centered way of agriculture. Now, this differs from a lot of the more, I'd say, communist, left-leaning way dominance right now of the horticulture world, where really humans are the enemy in their eyes. Remember, these same people who run the horticulture world, the World Economic Forum, the World Wildlife Federation, these are all fronts for stealing your land and killing you. Okay, but permaculture, it's human based. It doesn't treat humans as the enemy, and it helps us to create landscapes that help the human, okay, or the shuman, as I like to call them. But you can see here the 12 principles are: observe and interact, pay attention to the world around you, catch and store energy, right? And that could be just something as simple as setting up a rain barrel, okay, and then having that rain flow out and use it to water your gardens. Obtain a yield, huge. Make sure you're getting valuable results. Be open to modify your dysfunctional behaviors. Use and value renewables, right? Produce no waste. Design from pattern to detail. Integrate. Use small and slow solutions. Use and value diversity. And what's called use edges, the value and marginal. And of course, these are all, and of course, creatively use and respond to change. Now, of course, each one of these things can take you on a months-long journey of education. And we're not here to dive too deeply into all of these. If you are truly interested in this, and I highly recommend you study it, you can get books that are as simple as these right here: Permaculture for Beginners. Here's another one, Permaculture for Beginners. And you can get extremely complex. Now, the permaculture, in order to be able to use the permaculture name, you have to go through a 72-hour course, and on permaculture, on the principles, on the design aspects of it, but also the philosophy of it. And I took the permaculture design course in 2011 here in New York City. And I don't want to out the person who I took it from, but I have to say it was a nightmare. The reason why is because I took it in the height of Hipsterville in Brooklyn, near Williamsburg, Brooklyn. And I took the class expecting to learn hardcore agriculture, hardcore plant life, hardcore scientific information that I could use to, well, learn how to build these gardens. And really what I got was a guru type sitting up there and trying to fool all these dumb hipsters from Williamsburg. And who knows what was going on behind the scenes there. I'm not going to cast aspersions, but I was very, very disappointed with the permaculture design course that I took. But nevertheless, I am now certified in a permaculture, and because of that, the way that this whole works is that if you're certified, then you are free to teach it on your own. So I'm actually thinking about creating a hardcore permaculture design course on YouTube that people could take for free, and start influencing people in that way. I mean, we had people in our permaculture class learning about how to set up breweries with permaculture, or how to set up, what unicycle shops. You know how these hipsters are. And I just was looking around me, horrified at all of it. But I kept my mouth shut, and I just put my nose to the grindstone, realized I wasn't getting educated there. So, I educated myself, not a big deal. But something like this, the Permaculture Design Manual, and there are even more hardcore textbooks that you can buy that really go into the depths. Now, what am I talking about? Like, look at all these section elevation, this drawing, right? And this is but one of thousands that you can look at in these books. But this is a good example here of why permaculture is so useful as a way to build your farms, because everything has a purpose and everything has multiple purposes. So you can build a little greenhouse on the side of your house facing south, right? And then the sun comes in, it heats the greenhouse so you can grow plants. It also heats your house, right? And then you can get a little cold frame, and the water that you can have water drip down here and collect into rain tanks. And you can have vines that give you insulation, but that also give you fruit. I mean, the possibilities are endless here. So today isn't meant to get into the hardcore design aspects of it. Today is more about philosophy. And of course, if you go to Google or any website of your choice, you can type in permaculture and you can find a million books on it. This was just a screenshot I took today. But today we're talking about a book called The One Straw Revolution. And Professor, of course, here's Bill Mollison with Masanobu. So I thought that this was a fun picture to show the audience, because they were friends, and and Mollison was highly influenced by this gentleman. Let me just grab some water here. Professor, if you have anything to add, please. All right. So we will carry on in our discussion now. Today, what I wanted to present to you guys out there was just some inspirational passages from this book to hopefully whet your appetites, WHET, whet your appetites for further study, because that's what this is all about. We could never, in the time that we have today, get into the weeds, so to speak, of all this stuff. But we can learn a little bit about Masanobu-san's philosophy and how it can apply to us as experienced gardeners or budding gardeners, or people who are just interested in this. Of course, with the hope that you put these philosophies into action, even if you just grow a couple vegetables in your backyard, and take that money away from the large agribusiness, right? The people who are growing essentially poisoned food and poisoned soil. And of course, all we need to do is look around us. I mean, look at humanity today. I mean, it's not very pleasant to be looking at humanity out there. In fact, sometimes I watch television. I admit it. Sometimes I watch TV, and I have to say that there used to be attractive people on television. Every commercial now that I see is an assault on my senses. First of all, I have to mute it so I'm not hearing all the vocal fry and all the uptick and all the songs that sound like people honking at me, with all the, of course, neuro-linguistic programming that these evil demons throw in there to put in subliminal messages in our head. But I remember a day when TV used to be filled with attractive people, but of course that is another topic for another day. But let's talk about this here. So this book was called One Straw Revolution because it was all about how his method of farming, which essentially just copied nature, right? He was influenced by nature and he allowed that into him. And he then worked with nature rather than try to bludgeon it to death. And it all started from one grain of straw. I believe that a revolution can begin from this one strand of straw. Seen at a glance, this rice straw may appear light and insignificant. Hardly anyone would have believed that it could start a revolution. But I have come to realize the weight and power of this straw. For me, this revolution is very real. Now, of course, what is he talking about? He's talking about here in purely horticultural terms, the use of crop waste to fertilize the soil. This is something that's actually shouldn't be very revolutionary to people, but it is, because if you go to your average Home Depot of the world, you'll see everybody carrying their bags of fertilizer, which were made in oftentimes by natural gas, very poisonous chemicals, made in very polluting processes, which also create steroidal plants, which are completely out of balance. But he instead chose to use the crop waste to feed back the soil into the soil, and thus created a revolution in agriculture, which made not necessary the use for all of these chemicals. And if you think about it, what did farmers do 500 years ago, 1,000 years ago, even 400 years ago, when we didn't have these chemicals? Well, they farmed very much like the way we're trying to get back to today. And now I'm not a historian of the human genome, but I would probably say that people back then were stronger, had better bone structure, bone density, certainly didn't have the chemical filth going around their bloodstreams like we do today. And of course, most of those filths that we get into our bloodstream come directly from the chemicals that we spray on our industrial agriculture. All right. So here is how Masanobu-san was inspired. Now, remember, he was a plant researcher. He was a member of, the standard scientific, not elite of his time, but he was part of that whole system. And one day, the basic idea came to him one day as he happened to pass an old field which had been left unused and unplowed for many years. There he saw healthy rice seedlings sprouting through the tangle of grasses and weeds. From that time on, he stopped flooding his field in order to grow rice. He stopped sowing rice seed in the spring and instead put the seed out in the autumn, sowing it directly onto the surface of the field when it would naturally have fallen to the ground. Instead of plowing the soil to get rid of weeds, he learned to control them by a more or less permanent ground cover of white clover and a mulch of rice and barley straw. Once he had seen to it that the conditions had been tilted in favor of his crops, Mr. Fukuoka interferes as little as possible with the plant and animal communities in his field. This is revolutionary. I know it doesn't sound like it, but this is revolution right here. This is true revolution, right? This isn't the revolution of these fake CIA invented, system invented groups called BLM or Antifa, or even the ones on the right, which are probably co-opted and complete by the system. Oh God. Oh no. The trigger warning. So, and again, we don't have the time to get into the details of all this, but I suggest, of course, that you read these books. Now, here is why this is revolutionary, because in caring for a quarter-acre field, one or two people can do all the work of growing rice and winter grain in a matter of a few days. Think about this. If one or two people can do the job of what now we rely on huge fields, huge conglomerates, huge tractors and machinery, tons and tons, hundreds and thousands of tons of chemicals. If two people can do this naturally and do it in a few days, well, that leaves us a lot of extra time to do things like think, philosophize, write music, write poetry, read, grow families, right? All sorts of things that we generally do not have time to do in our modern world because we're so busy doing what? Working for those green pieces of paper, which then we then have to give back to the system in order to get their poisoned food. And I know what some people are saying out there. Well, I eat organic. I'm doing my part. Well, the fact is, organic standards have been lowered so much by now, so as to render it almost useless. In fact, I hate to say it, but I often find conventional agricultural products, even though I know they're filled with poison, I find them to be tastier than a lot of the organic stuff that I get. So, and of course, I never understood why organic costs more if organic is supposed to get rid of pesticides, herbicides, conventional weed removal, and so on and so forth. Those kind of things don't make sense to me. But again, this method completely contradicts modern agricultural techniques. It throws scientific knowledge and traditional farming know-how right out the window. With this kind of farming, which uses no machines, no prepared fertilizer, and no chemicals, it is possible to attain a harvest equal to or greater than that of the average Japanese farm. And the proof is ripening right before your eyes. So his whole deal was towards a do-nothing farming. And we're not going to read all of this, okay? But this was highly influential to me when I read about this. And I tried to teach this to my students at NYBG. And I think quite a lot of them got it. Everybody was always asking, what do I do? What techniques do I need to learn? What do I need to do this and do that and do that? And again, it was this modern mindset being brought to a field of study that didn't need to be there in the first place. The Masanobu-san, he revolutionized things by asking, what can we not do? Which one of these practices that we've done for so many years by rote, right, that we just don't even think about, things like plowing fields, using chemicals to get rid of weeds, digging all the time, our soils. What can we take away from these processes in order to make our lives easier? And he realized that basically we can get rid of almost everything if we just follow nature. And this isn't to say that being a farmer is going to be easy, or that you're going to be able to sit there all day with a straw in your mouth, maybe a joint in your mouth, and just do nothing, because that's not what it means. But what it means is working smarter, working more efficiently, working with nature rather than trying to bludgeon it, and allowing nature to do the work for you. And believe me, nature wants to do this work for you. I always would say to my students, let the ants and the earthworms do the job of cultivating your soil, meaning digging it, right? Why should you sit there breaking your back doing all these things like double digging, which is just very strange if you actually study soil science? It makes no sense. It's like taking the bottom, the subsoil and bringing it to the top, and taking the good topsoil and putting it down in the bottom. It just makes no sense. Okay. So his whole deal was working smarter, not harder. So, of course, this line of reasoning not only applies to agriculture, but to human society as well. And of course, my friends out there in Professor Hamamoto land, this is extremely revolutionary, right? Because this shows us that the systems that we have erected around us are artificial. They're made to serve who? Well, the elite demons who run it, who invented it in the first place, who capitalize off of all the millions of people they created with their green revolution. And of course, now they're killing us all. And it's pointless, right? Doctors and medicine become necessary when people create a sickly environment. Formal schooling has no intrinsic value, but becomes necessary when humanity creates a condition in which one must become educated to get along. So, of course, human beings with their tamperings do something wrong and leave the damage unrepaired. And when the adverse results accumulate, work with all their might to correct them. When these corrective actions appear to be successful, they come to view these measures as splendid accomplishments. People do this over and over again. It's as if a fool were to stomp on and break the tiles of his roof, Then when it starts to rain and the ceiling begins to rot away, he hastily climbs up to mend the damage, rejoicing in the end that he has accomplished a miraculous solution. It is the same with the scientist. He pores over books night and day, straining his eyes and becoming nearsighted. And if you wonder what on earth he has been working on all that time, it is to become the inventor of eyeglasses to correct nearsightedness. So in a very simple way, boy, this is some revolutionary stuff. I mean, this is unbelievably revolutionary. I know it seems simple, but that is where the power lies, in a very small and short and easily understood book called The One Straw Revolution. So here is where it gets a little bit more complex and where it gets very, very, makes the system very nervous. The 4 principles of natural farming. Okay. So let's go through these, each one of these, because this upends all of our common knowledge on what farming is, what it should be, right? And it introduces these new thoughts and theories, which are actually very, very old school in a sense. And it reintroduces these back into the parlance for the modern gardener. So, of course, the first is no cultivation. Okay, that is no plowing or turning of the soil. For centuries, farmers have assumed that the plow is essential for growing crops. However, non-cultivation is fundamental to natural farming. The earth cultivates itself naturally by the means of the penetration of plant roots and the activity of microorganisms, small animals, and earthworms. So this gets back to what I was saying before about how let nature do the work for you, man. Like, there's no reason why you shouldn't. You have an army of free workers down there in the soil that all you need to do, as Masanobu-san figured out, is feed them by throwing organic matter, crop wastes, back onto the surface of the soil, where not only will you feed the microbes and the earthworms and the small animals and all that kind of stuff, but you're also creating the conditions whereby they can proliferate. And it all costs you absolutely nothing. I'm an ornamental gardener here in New York City. It's how I make my living. Okay. I didn't mean for it to be. I started in gardening again to be a revolutionary, to be a permaculture farmer. And I realized after my first year internship at the famous Wave Hill Garden here in the Bronx, where I was trained, when I went down to my farm right after that in Puerto Rico, I realized very quickly that I wasn't prepared. I knew nothing about how to really do this. And so what I decided to do was come back to New York and, start a career here in ornamental gardening, because it was the only way to make a living, and learn all of these, learn all of the techniques of gardening, but also start putting into practice these techniques so I could have experience and learn. And now, about almost 15 years on, I have, I lost a lot of work during the last 2 years because of my refusal to play along with all this, with all the insanity of the good Germans of America. But I have a ton of gardens here in New York that I've worked on, and now I'm currently getting my groove back, and I'm putting into practice these principles at New York City Gardens. It's amazing how much the clients, they think that everything should be chemical. I should be digging up the soil all the time in order to turn it over because somehow that makes it better, right? And I just say, hey, man, like, yeah, chill. Do nothing. Leave the soil alone. All of the leaves that coming down in the fall, let me put them in a pile somewhere. Let me throw some sand on top so they don't blow away. Let those compost down, and then I can use those leaves the next year to put back to the soil. After all, the plant took those nutrients and elements out of that ground, created that plant product. Shouldn't it make sense to let it fall, rot where it falls, so it can then feed the earth back again? Remember, matter cannot be created or destroyed. It just changes forms. So when you put into practice the whole notion of no cultivation, no soil disturbance, you are leaving these ecosystems intact, which want to be left intact. Remember, the earth doesn't doesn't dig itself with tractors and machinery. It does it very slowly. That in itself is a revolutionary act. And also, you are preserving precious topsoils by leaving them alone to regenerate. And the system hates that. They want you to be buying all of their products, which only become necessary once you disturb the soil. And that brings us to the second principle of natural gardening and farming. The second is no chemical fertilizer or prepared compost. This blows people away. Okay. People interfere with nature, and try as they may, they cannot heal the resulting wounds. Their careless farming practices drain the soil of essential nutrients, and the result is yearly depletion of the land. If left to itself, the soil maintains its fertility naturally in accordance with the orderly cycle of plant and animal life. So, of course, it should be fairly intuitive. No chemical fertilizers. First of all, Monsanto is our arch enemy. It wants us dead. All of these companies, all of these things are endocrine disruptors, hormone disruptors. They turn the frogs gay, as Alex Jones actually rightly pointed out many years ago. They're not only turning the frogs gay, folks, but that's a whole other issue. But anyway, so no chemical fertilizer is huge. But the second one, no prepared compost, is a little counterintuitive to a lot of natural gardeners. What? I shouldn't have a compost pile? I shouldn't have a compost that I apply to my soils? Actually, no, you shouldn't have to do that work. If you do what I said before and let things rot on your soil, okay, let the leaves fall and keep them there, right? They're going to turn into what we call humus. Humus is compost. Compost is humus. All those two terms mean, humus and compost, all they mean are the end result of the decay of organic matter. The only difference is that compost is made with these two things and this thing in here, and humus is made by nature. So what he does is he collects all the straw, okay, that from the dead rice plants, and then he has a yearly cycle where he had barley plants and grain plants growing when the rice wasn't growing, and he just returned all that crop waste right to the soil. The seeds that he sowed down there, they have no problem germinating through that. Okay. So this in and of itself is another revolutionary act where you don't have to spend all this time making these compost piles. Now, some people love making compost piles. That's on you, folks. I mean, if you like that, hey, there's really no harm in it. You're just doing work that isn't necessary. Okay. If you garden with nature. The third is no weeding by tillage or herbicides. Weeds play their part in building soil fertility and in balancing the biological community. As a fundamental principle, weeds should be controlled, not eliminated. Straw mulch, the revolutionary straw, a ground cover of white clover interplanted with the crops, and temporary flooding provides effective weed control in my fields. Now, revolution. Okay, it's all about disengaging from these systems. The whole point of modern agriculture really is geared around, and modern gardening is geared around using chemicals as your friend, using chemicals to get rid of these things that we call weeds. Well, if you do a little bit more study into weeds, you realize how important weeds are to actually regenerating the planet. Weeds are the natural scar tissue that occurs when you disturb soils. If you follow the first principle of no cultivation, over time, you're not going to have as many weeds. Why? Because every time you plow soil, every time you dig it, every time you disturb it in any way, shape, or form, you expose all the weed seeds that are lying there dormant. And then they have a nice little access to sunlight, air, and water that they normally wouldn't get. Perfect example of that is, of course, during World War II, when the Germans bombed England, created all these craters in the land. The botanists were rejoicing because all of a sudden all these plants they haven't seen in 500 years were growing back. Every time you dig soil, you are a German Luftwaffe airplane, and you are creating those same exact phenomenon. Okay. Now, I'm being simplistic here. You have to have a lot of experience, and you have to You have to have knowledge in order to do this correctly. But if you just simply stop weeding by tillage, in other words, opening up the soil and pulling out weeds, you can help to not only build your soil, but build the environment in which new weeds will not grow back as plentiful. And of course, the fourth is no dependence whatsoever on chemicals. From the time that weak plants develop as a result of such unnatural practices as plowing and fertilizing, disease and insect imbalance become a great problem in agriculture. Nature left alone is in perfect balance. Harmful insects and plant diseases are always present, but do not occur in nature to an extent which requires the use of poisonous chemicals. The sensible approach to disease and insect control is to grow sturdy crops in a healthy environment. And of course, this is incredibly revolutionary, because not only is this, taking money away from the chemical companies, which again want you dead, but they don't want you dead immediately. They want you sick. So you rely on their other conglomerates, which is the biopharmaceutical systems and the drugs in which they give you to mask the symptoms created by their chemicals, right? All these alien molecules in the air that we're eating, breathing, applying to our skin. You need to stop doing that, folks. Okay, but also this can be translated to human health as well, right? If you have a body in balance, it wants to stay healthy. And you only need these chemicals once you're out of balance. So speaking about soil and planting, one of the reasons why they have such a need in industrial agriculture for all these chemicals is because they're growing what are called monocultures: only soy, only corn, only wheat, and so on and so forth. So what happens is when you have these huge expanses of one plant, it's very easy for a disease to go through there and ravage everything, or insects to go through there and ravage everything. And of course, if you grow crops that are diverse, it's just like having diverse health in us. It creates a body which is much more resilient to disease. Professor, nice to see you.
Yes, this concept of monoculture, in hearing you speak, it made me realize that that concept can also be applied to society and the larger expressive culture, not just plant culture, right?
Tell me more.
If you develop a corporate culture that's only consists of large chain restaurants or supermarkets, you're developing a monoculture that's a mirror image of the mono agriculture. It's a death culture. It is a Harris culture.
Trigger warning. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely, Professor. I mean, totally. And America's filled with these monocultures. And just look, of course, at the result. We're fractured, we're depressed, and we're all on drugs. So, I mean, I know our audience isn't like that, but we're talking about the wider culture here. It's great comparison there.
Well, these are the people of Kmart. I don't know if you watch that on YouTube. But as we close out here, we have about 8 minutes.
Oh, okay. Wow.
You're a horticulturalist, and I just had to ask you about the occultic aspect of it, because, the people who practice what you are laying out today, these are the bourgeoisie, these are the capital, these are the ultra elite, the people of Intumara Park, for example. They use these principles, but they deny us this knowledge, this occulted, this hidden knowledge. So I've been doing a little work on my own and wanted to broach this question to you, Mr. Grossman. This idea of the American beauty. Of course, it harkens to this movie by Sam Mendes, spelled like the goat of Mendes, by the way, written by a guy named Alan Ball, who is being rewarded richly for his specialty of advancing the GLBT agenda in movies like this. And of course, we have the great Hollywood and London pervert, Kevin Spacey, who was just recently beat the rap, I think a couple of weeks ago. I had the reporter who covered the trial there. And of course, he starred in American Beauty.
Right, and
And
that's an absolutely spiritually sick movie. I mean, I saw it in the theaters, and I wasn't really super conscious back then. But yeah, it's basically about pedophilia and yeah,
incest.
and
Yeah.
incest. Yeah.
So it's coming from these occultic roots, and I think I've traced it down to this individual named Henri Ledeschaux. He's a horticulturalist, agronomist, who came up with that hybrid called American Beauty. Rosa American Beauty, that's a species and genus name for that. It's a pink flower. And of
Right.
course, that flower, that rose image has been adopted by the subculture within the gay community who are totally into anality,
Oh,
right? And they
yeah.
call that rosebud. It's in the Urban
No,
Dictionary if people want to check it out.
I
And what
have
that
heard
means,
that before.
oh, you have, okay.
Yeah. Well, but
It's
explain for the audience.
Well, it means anal prolapse. That's from anal intercourse. Because I'm sorry I had to go there, but this is also Knights Templar. Knights Templar were denounced by the king and the pope for sodomy. Right? We're talking about uh, Jacques de la Molay. All the persecution. Of course, the Templars became the basis of our banking system.
Right, of course. And the
And
Rosicrucians, and that has something
well,
to do with roses.
you just
Oh,
mentioned that. This is
there
from
we
the
go.
German version. Adam Weishaupt. This is Rosenkreuz, the Rose Cross. This is from a German text that lays it all out. So far as the flower and agricultural imagery here is being generative and regenerative. So I've been going on that, and this is where we wind up politically with our monopolitical culture, right? We think that
Exactly.
Orange Man represents an alternative to whoever else is out there, but it's actually a monoculture. It's a mono media. It's a mono everything, and that means death. And this is where we wind up with this Royce and Kreuzer.
Yeah, this horrific cackler in chief. I mean, this is a travesty that we are such a spiritually sick nation that we would actually allow this to occur.
And what is the first public extravaganza, even before the age of television, where the national focus was on the rose?
Right.
It was the Pasadena Tournament of Rosicrucianism, which is also the capital of the Blavatskyians, the Theosophical Society, Jack Parsons, Caltech. You know all that story there.
Right.
So you see this continuity here. Now I better understand the metaphysics of gardening and why this hidden knowledge that you are liberating from the hoarders of this knowledge is so important to our survival. Anyway, as a horticulturalist, as a person, I don't know if you're into rose cultivation, I wonder if you can tell me whether, here's the guy who, Josephin Paladin, he's the person that came up with the French wing of the Rosicrucians that I think influenced the guy who created the American rose, the American Beauty hybrid, right? So it's an occult celebrated now at the Pasadena Rose Parade. So I wonder if you can tell me if I'm on the right track, or am I just bugging out here?
Well, I mean, not knowing the full history of all this, I couldn't say one way or the other. You may be on a great track or you may be bugging out, but there is no doubt that the horticulture industry and the I call them the eyes wide shut crowd. They are the sickest people that you can imagine. I mean, I have only experience here in New York, but we call they're known as the gay mafia. They run it all here. And if you're not part of it, you ain't making it. And I felt like a spy, when I was involved with the New York Botanical Garden for so many years. I had to keep myself hidden and my true nature suppressed, because these people are evil and they don't want to hear truth. They're all funded by the major chemical companies. Pfizer is one of the biggest donees to the New York Botanical Garden, so much so that their plant laboratory is called the Pfizer Plant Laboratory. And so there is an intersection with the high elite and horticulture, which should be parsed out more. My main thing, Professor, has always been the straight up horticulture. And so I don't know if I can really speak to that with any authority, but I think that you could be onto something for further research with maybe, maybe another researcher who knows more about that than I do.
Well, this is what I'm trying to stimulate so far as further discussion and research topics. I can use the example of the haute couture, high fashion, like Balenciaga. All those people who are following the headlines here are just not really getting us anywhere. They're just saying, oh, well, isn't this awful pedophilia in the open? But they don't understand that haute couture, which is headed by the Anna Wintour and Tina Brown. These are two British assets who control the communications. This is sign system. It's semiotics. Haute couture is the way that they communicate with one another, and also can recognize each other. It's a secret handshake, a visual secret handshake that these people do it. But you've noticed, you've alluded to this already, that the super elite have beautiful gardens, and they have that horticultural knowledge. That is also a sign system for themselves that reinforces this model of subjugation of us. And these are the ones who own Post Toasties and Adweek, and they're the advertising agencies, right?
Absolutely.
This guy who wrote American Beauty, Alan Ball, was an advertising man, right? A lot of these guys come from advertising because they know about memes, they know about what sticks, earworms, jingles.
Right.
You understand this.
That's why I always mute the commercials, because I know that I'm being programmed by that stuff, even though I'm aware of it. I think it just all gets back to, again, the George Carlin's brilliant statement. It's a big club and we ain't in it. And we better start to create our own systems and our own ways of life, because it's not a joke anymore, Professor. As you know, humanity has been made a target by these evil people, and they aren't stopping. If we think that any of this stuff is stopping, we are severely, severely demented in that thought. And the only way out is through. And we have to all, in my opinion, we have to all simplify. We have to all get rid of these notions of trying to make it, right? Make it in what? An evil system? The only way you can make it in these evil systems is to be evil. We need to get back to the land. And this is something that has been around now for 100 years, but it's never, in my opinion, been more important than now. And let me tell you, the earth needs us, folks. So with that, Professor Hamamoto, I want to say thank you so much for giving me the forum today.
Well, that's a beautiful closing editorial statement, Mr. Grossman. Once more, however, please give us the contact information for your gardening site, as well as the Son of Sam True Crime revamp.
Sure. Well, the gardening, which is, of course, going to be more dear to people who are listening to this than the true crime, the gardening channel is Gardening Uncensored with Manny Grossman, where you will find all the same classes that I taught at NYBG. I am doing them for free online. My approach is starve the beast, get out of these evil systems. And then, of course, as Professor Hamamoto called me, I'm a true crime provocateur, which I like that one because it's very, very accurate. That you can find my true crime channel at Son of Sam Truth with Manny Grossman.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, Mr. Grossman.
You're very welcome.
Audience thanks you. Your audience thanks you. Humanity thanks you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, I hope you liked the show. We're going to have some interesting guests to close out the year as well, and really hit the ground running in 2023. Thank you very much for joining us today. Implement some of these very simple principles, and we're going to get out of this mess. All right. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Bye-bye.